man that's never mortified to take on anything, Shafiq Morton, coming up right now. Hello and welcome to the show. Now, there's a voice that you hear around this country, and it's the current affairs, it's the real situation, and you know it's the credible story, and that's Shafiq Morton. Shafiq, welcome to the show.
Welcome salam. Thanks a lot.
Nice having you. Now, the funny thing is, I started off saying that you're never mortified by anything, and I always thought that's a nice tagline for your show.
I like it.
Just because you take on things that's right in the face and you say it as it is, and I admire that of you, because for somebody that's much my senior in media, one always looks at people like you and say, will I be that courageous one day just to say it as it is? And that's something that people know you for. But before all of that, there's this man back in the scene that's Shafiq Morton, that I think that people want to know and people want to understand, because what we see on TV and what we hear on the radio is the stories that you tell in a very articulate way. But who's Shafiq Morton? Where did it all start? And where did he come from? I think that's what I want to find out today. So where did it all start?
It started at the beginning. Okay, I've always wanted to do that line. But basically I am South African. A lot of people think that I'm not.
Well, I thought the same.
Yeah, I am actually third generation on one side and fourth or fifth generation on the other side. My mother's side, fourth or fifth generation. My father's side, third generation. So I know very little about Europe. I know very little about the other countries where I'm supposed to come from. I get very cold when I go to those places. I'm happy to be an African.
Right, that's interesting, because I had the very same thought. I just wondered, and I thought was in Irish descent or something like that. But I think I'm absolutely wrong.
It's Gaelic. In fact, the word Morton means in the marsh. So my ancestors must have had their feet in mud or something like that.
Which is interesting. So, born and bred in Cape Town, and you sort of grow up in a very strange environment, and that's, I'm assuming that there's political turmoil, there's issues happening.
I was born into political turmoil.
Which is interesting, because if I look at you as a revert coming from the white community, it just didn't fit the picture for me when I'm trying to think when this all happened, because this happened at a time that the country was in a very different space to what it was now. You want to tell us about that journey?
Well, it's a long journey. I can remember as a young child, I used to stay in a suburb called Pinelands. In those days, it was very undeveloped. And we were the last houses before Langa. And this was the 60s, and this was the time of what they called the Polka uprising. So I was, in a sense, aware very early on that something was afoot in the country into which I was born. And I sometimes think that actually had a long-lasting effect on me, because since then I've always been interested in politics and in the very unique social situation that South Africa found itself during the years of a man called Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd, who I believe was insane.
That's interesting. I think that you've just opened up that thought in my mind too, that he might have just been insane. But the interesting thing is, so all of that's happening, but something I said early on when we met, and that was that I think that there were many people in the country that sort of on both sides saw things happening. So from your community, and with all due respect to some of the people and the good people out there, and they watched the scene unfold and things were happening. But then there are people like you that crossed the divide, that decided to take action and become part of the plan. And not only become part of the plan, but sort of slip into another community. How does that happen?
It's a long story. I think I'm going to give you the short one.
The defining moment.
Yeah, I would say that the defining moment, okay, I mean, I'll transport us all the way to the 1980s, was when I actually became a Muslim. I'd been involved in the struggle since the 1970s. I know lots of white people say that, okay, but I'm still saying it. But nevertheless, in the mid-80s, I started to realize that the word non-racism, as reflected by some of the struggle organizations, just wasn't doing it for me, because even in those days I was picking up a lot of hypocrisy, and I became a victim of that hypocrisy from time to time. I'm not trying to victimize myself, but the good thing was it started to make me think. And I had a lot of contact with people who were Muslims. I met the late Dr. Ahmad Davids before I was a Muslim, many, many years before that. And one thing that struck me about Islam was that Islam wasn't non-racist, it was anti-racist. In the sense that Islam would recognize a person's differences, but in the sense that everybody belonged to humanity, could belong to humanity, that there could be a common cause, but at the same time it would recognize diversity. This is something in the 70s and 80s that the struggle politics was having a great problem with. You talk to anybody of color who went into the struggle, that they're not being honest if they say it wasn't an issue. And if you look at the history of the ANC and the PAC, this theme does actually come out.
So now I know many Muslims say this, and I think we've all come to realize as people that are born Muslim, we sort of throw this line all the time when we talk about reverts, and that is that reverts tend to excel. And we sometimes sit back saying, I must be ashamed of myself because this man led half his life as a non-Muslim. He comes in, he performs better than what I am, whichever scale you want to call that on. What's the driving force behind that? Because as a revert, do you have a sense of that I need to excel in what I'm doing because I came into something? Because for some reason, you guys do.
Well, I'm driven by curiosity, and in the classics they say curiosity killed the cat, and I think I have had 9 lives as far as this is concerned in my life passage. But basically what happens is that you are motivated by this curiosity to find out what makes things work. I'm just that kind of a person, and Islam is such a deep ocean. The minute you start swimming in it, you carry on swimming and you carry on swimming and you carry on swimming, and you're never going to reach the other end of the shore because it's such a huge ocean. As Sheikh Nazim Adil al-Haqqani will say, he uses the word mercy oceans. So you're swimming in this massive ocean which is called Islam. You're never going to get to the other side, but you are motivated to carry on swimming, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Correct, yes. Of course, the sense of hope is there all the time. But the interesting thing is, so I can only imagine you come from a culture and a background that's white and perhaps Christian and non-Muslim, and you come into that fold. But the integration for me I find amazing. I think that's the part that's getting stuck in the back of my head, and that's the high level of integration. Because if people that haven't seen Shafiq before is watching the program now, and they were like, is that him? Because it's like, we know the voice.
I'm sorry I'm disappointing so many people.
no, I don't think so. I think it's a pleasant delight for some people, perhaps, to see you finally on the other side. The family life, the children, the wife, and the studies. I know that you went into teaching.
Yeah, in fact, I've had a very interesting and varied career. When I was a student, I was already involved in media and in journalism. I was a passionate photographer, and at school I thought I was very creative with my writing. But what happened was that I was a keen surfer, and in the 70s I had a surfing column with the Cape Times. Tony Hurd was the editor, and those were the days when the Cape Times was a newspaper of great substance. And the interesting thing about my column was I was allowed to make social commentary, although some people wanted to hang me at the time. And I was able to use that column as a bridge between white surfing and non-white surfing at the end of the day. So it was a very interesting chapter. But at the same time, I'd qualified as a teacher, and I ended up as a school teacher at a place called Lavender Hill on the Cape Flats. The interesting thing was, this was the late 70s. District 6 was being emptied of people, and Lavender Hill was one of the dumping grounds, like Bonteheerville, Mannenberg, etc. The interesting thing about Lavender Hill is that a lot of the streets there and the flats were named after the flats and the streets in District 6, which to me was totally weird and was the ultimate indignity, to foist upon people. But what informed my life from there was that I saw communities that had been completely gutted. Old people who'd lost their soul, young people with no direction, families thrown next to other families who they didn't know as neighbors. The old ethos of borrowing sugar had gone. I saw a whole community that had been destroyed by a despicable thing called the Group Areas Act. And I've never ever forgotten that. The impact of the Group Areas Act is something that is so underestimated in this country. I saw people dying as a result of the Group Areas Act, dying of sadness.
Are you saying that it somehow defines some of the things that you do today and some of the output within your work that we see?
Absolutely. It defines, I think it began to define my sense of what is justice and what is injustice and how you treat people. I mean, the whole impersonal nature of the so-called Cape Flats, the way that they built these flats out of breeze block bricks, the fact that when people wanted to go to the bathroom, they had to go across a balcony, and in the middle of winter you've got the cold southeaster blowing or rain coming in, all these kind of things which the engineers hadn't thought of in terms of giving people dignity.
So you go into radio at some point, and I think that people now, so there's an augmentation from the Cape Times into radio, and that's the voice that we know today, dealing with very topical current affairs. Is that only driven by the need from the station, or are some of those topics that we find coming across today things that you feel that your position in society plays a role in making that change through the show that you host in the afternoon?
It's a synthesis, and very quickly, like the synthesis is also my career path, because I also ended up working for Muslim Views for a few years. I also was a freelance or a stringer for the Y services as a photographer during the 80s, during the late part of the 80s in terms of the anti-apartheid struggle. And then I went on to cover the release of Nelson Mandela. I covered the Namibian independence scenario. I went to Zimbabwe, Botswana. I did all that kind of stuff at that stage of my life. How I got into radio is interesting. I got into radio by default, not by design. I was working at the MJC for a very short period as
Working at the MJC?
As an editor of Adawa, the newspaper.
There's something new.
Yes. I was there for 3 months.
Okay.
And then I went on to other things after that. And what happened was I saw this whole radio station being planned in front of my eyes, and what happened was that Anwar Ismail, who was the station manager then, said, okay, Shafiq, you come and you're a news guy.
Anwar that lived in the UK?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
He was a film producer by trade, ending up in community radio. Yes. So they asked me to become part of the first news team. It was Aisha Ismail, who went on to ETV, Manaji Karan, well known, myself, and I can't remember who the other person was. It was quite a while ago, more than 20 years ago. We were sort of the first news team at Voice of the Cape. After that, when the station got a permanent license, Anwar Ismail came to visit me one day and he said, we need a news editor. Okay, and I thought, are you crazy? But somehow he managed to persuade me to become the first news editor at Voice of the Cape. And we were the team with myself, Mehboob Bawa, Anwar Ismail, Imam Fuad Samai, and others, Imam Shakir Ahmad. We actually built up the first version of Voice of the Cape, and that was in 1995.
And back then in 95, I'm supposing that around the country, if you look at the radio space and within the specific genre of Islamic and Muslim broadcasting, I don't think there was much to go by at the time.
There was nothing to go by. There were no standards. We didn't know what the standards were. It was
the model?
It was a leap into the unknown, and it gave flying by the seat of your pants a whole new definition. Believe you me.
But you saw that grow, and so you start picking up that audience response, and you augment the growth based on what you're getting back. Sitting back now, looking at those days, what's your thoughts? What's your reflection on those days? Do you feel that? I mean, it's something to when you're reflecting that things have changed in terms of the parallelness of the community.
The community has matured a tremendous amount, and you know, we can deal with issues today on Deen TV as well, on Voice of the Cape, on 786, on all the other platforms, which we couldn't deal with in those days. And I think Voice of the Cape was one of the pioneers in breaking the ice, in giving that space where people could actually talk to each other, not talk past each other, talk about the issues, understand the issues. And today, for example, we can deal with topics like homosexuality, we can deal with marriage issues or whatever it might be in a very mature fashion, whereas like 20 years ago, people would just swear on the phone and that would be it.
Of course. Shafiq, while you say that, I know that in the beginning of the interview, you said that the one thing that attracted you to Islam was the fact that this religion had a space and created a space for diversity.
Absolutely.
Do you believe that today, and I've been watching your Facebook post, and there's been some activity going on there, and it's a nice platform itself that's developed there, but do you believe that we as people today are really, truly living that diverse model and that acceptance within ourselves?
The honest answer is no.
I think that's a big problem.
It is a huge problem. It's a world problem, yes. It's an international problem, yes.
We understand what Islam says,
Yeah,
but I'm saying what the Muslim says is a different thing. I'm going to make a very strange statement. I believe that Islam is perfect. I don't believe that the Muslim is. And I think I know it sounds bad, but that's what it is.
The Deen is perfect.
Yes.
We as human beings have imperfections, I think is the best way to actually understand that question.
So what is the solution? Because you're on the forefront of all these issues. We see the raging Shia-Sunni debate. We see the Wahhabi aspect and the Sufi aspect going on. So we see all of this going on. What's the solution to all of that?
The solution is we have to understand, number one, that we are all different. But that's not a curse. And that's not something that should actually divide us. Because when you start to talk to people as people, the human things start to come out. I mean, if I cut myself, my blood will be red. Your blood's not going to be blue or pink, it's going to be red. It's actually as simple as that. Or if you talk to a child, if the child is in Somalia, Sudan, or South Africa, children are the same wherever they are in the world. They're going to laugh at the same jokes. They're going to laugh at the same things. It's actually as simple as that. And we've all put ourselves on these pedestals of sectarianism, where we think that because somebody thinks differently to us, that it's got to be something that is foreign and something to be rejected. Whereas if we were to open ourselves up and to actually just listen for a second to somebody else, we might find that there's more in common than actually that there is not.
Do you feel that if we deconstruct who we are as people and go into the inner dimensions of being human beings first before anything else, I know that there's a saying that goes around, and yes, some people's going to slaughter me on this one, but I'm saying that people say, but I'm Muslim first. But a part of me sits back saying, what if I said that we need to come to the fact that we are human beings first? Would we not be a bit more easy and open to all the things that divide us as human beings?
We would arguably be following the prophetic model, because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who did he come to? He came to the whole of humanity. Rahmat lil alameen. It's in the plural. Alameen is worlds. It's the whole of creation. It's not just a certain group. It's not a certain race. It's not a certain ethnic identity. It's everybody. The language of the Quran, when the Quran goes Ayyuhan Nas, it's talking to mankind or humankind. It's not talking to Muslims. It's not talking to believers. So I think if we start to look at what the Quran is even telling us, then we will begin to understand that our responsibility as a Muslim is how we are to other people. There's a hadith in which our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, actually said to his Sahaba, his companions, make non-Muslims your neighbors.
Correct.
What's the message in that? The message is that we have to live with other people. It dovetails with the idea of Ubuntu, is that we are who we are through others, and the others don't have to be Muslim.
Correct, yes. So you're in an interesting space because you're at the forefront of many things. So I'm just going to allude to your Facebook post the other day, and the subsequent following of comments going into hundreds there and likes, and I also like that comment. But if you watch and you sit by and watch the comments go, so some people will be like, Shafiq, I respect you for what you do, but I agree with you and I disagree with you. Others will unpack you and say, I'm disappointed in what you're doing and the stance you've taken. And then others will, despite what you say, will still be part of what you're saying. So we have a range of opinions, but with all of that comes a danger. And the danger is, I either love you or I absolutely hate you. So you get haters in the business, and we know that. How do you deal with all those things? Because personally for me, 1,000 people say I love what you're doing. One person comes, bugger up my day and say, I just hate you. And you know what? I think about this one guy. How do you deal with those things?
I've learned over the years never to take anything personally. I mean, last week I was a Zionist. This week I'm a Shia sympathizer. Tomorrow I don't know what I'm going to be. It's part, if you're in the public space and you're putting commentary in the public space, people are, they're going to like you, they're going to crucify you, they're going to disagree with you. They are totally welcome to do that. People are free to hate me. I mean, that's what freedom is all about.
But they're missing your mission. What's your mission?
My mission is to try and communicate knowledge as opposed to information. As a journalist, it's my job to distill what's happening out there, to put it in here so we can actually understand what the real issues are and what's actually happening. Yes, it is my viewpoint, but at least I can be a lens, or I can be a mirror which can allow somebody else to understand perhaps a little better of actually what's going on in the world.
There's a reason why I asked this question, because I think that there's an outer covering to being a journalist, and I think that's what people see, and that's the actual story that was written and the picture that was taken, or the video, or the radio show. But I believe inside that a journalist is on a mission to change the world and to better the world. Do you see that as part of what you do?
I don't see it in such explicit terms. I feel that if I can reflect human values, if I can show the human side of a story, I'm more interested, in fact, in the human side of stories in any case, because politics is boring and it repeats itself over and over again. The actors just change and the scenarios change. But if one can get under the crust of that and get to the human side of things, that it makes it easier for other people to understand. It also makes it easier for us to understand ourselves. Because if you are not an actualized individual, you're not going to be really successful out there in terms of communicating any kind of message.
What's the highlight of your career? A particular day, incident that happened that either made you laugh or cry?
Oh, there's too many. I mean, I've seen war, I've seen the most beautiful things that human beings can do to other human beings, but I think the most moving time I ever had was in Libya at the height of the uprisings, and we were at a hospital in a town called Ajdabia, and I had a sat phone, and that was the only way we could communicate with the outside world, because Gaddafi's sons had shut off all.
What year was that?
2011.
2011, right?
So I was the only guy with a sat phone standing in this quad in the hospital. And this man came up to me, and he was crying, and he said, my son has just died. Because what would happen at Ajdabia, we'd go there at the end of the day, then all the guys would come in from the war front, and unfortunately the injured in the bodies would come in, and one of the bodies was his son. And he begged me and he said, listen, I have to phone my wife in the United States. We came to Libya to fight against Gaddafi, and my son has just died. I gave him my sat phone, and I'm a father, and I had to watch another parent telling his wife that their son had just died.
And he did that in front of you?
In front of me, and in front of other people. And that was a moving and a very difficult moment, because you have to keep equilibrium in those situations. You have to be empathetic, but not sympathetic. You've got to keep a slight distance, because if you get sucked into that vortex, then you're not going to be able to see any sense at all.
Correct, yes. So that's a moment to remember, I suppose. Now,
it is indeed.
Of course. Now, in your life, it's been a journey, and you still have a long journey to go. And there's family members, there's people around you. Who is it in your life today, and maybe from the past, that you thank for doing what you do today?
Well, of course, I thank my wife, who has stood by me for 25 years.
It's a tough life.
It is.
With people in media, I know.
I used to be a fireman journalist. People used to call me up and say, Shafiq, in 2 days you've got to be in Palestine, or you've got to be here, there, and everywhere. I mean, I can remember, for example, when my son was born, he came early. I went to the hospital, he was born, and 8 hours later I was on the plane to Jerusalem. And I didn't see him 3 weeks after that.
That's very big, and your wife's got to say yes to all of that, yes. I recall Maulana Sheikh Nazim Makani saying that for you to become somebody, you first need to become nobody and nothing.
That's very true.
And when I spoke to you throughout this journey of your life in 25 minutes, one sort of sees that, and because one of the stories you said before we went into the interview was the fact about you ate, or the swapping of the fish.
Yes.
And I think back on that, and it's like, in that journey, I need to become nothing first to become something. And today we see you as something and somebody in our society that's effecting that change through the work that you do. Thank you for coming into the show.
Absolute pleasure.
Shafiq Morton, a journey and a half. At some other point, I'm going to tell you the story about the fish. Until next time, goodbye.